All right. Well, welcome to the Behavioral Perspectives podcast. I am currently going to be asking some questions today for the podcast. My name is Dr. Benjamin Maxner, and this is my guest, Ashton Benedickt. She is a special education teacher, surfer, cook, mother, advocate for neurodiversity, and board certified behavior analyst. And one of the primary reasons that we've also brought her on is that she is also autistic. So we feel like she might have a lot to teach us today about the neurodiversity movement and bring in that perspective. Welcome, Ashton.
Hi, Ben. Thank you for having me.
So maybe you could give us a quick primer on what neurodiversity means, whether it's more broadly or to you personally, and kind of what the converse of that, which is more the ableism perspective.
Yeah. So to me, neurodiversity is about looking at autism and other diagnoses such as ADHD as more of a neurological difference that is like naturally occurring versus like a disorder or a disease that can be cured. So it's looking at it more, moving away from the medical model and looking at more in a social disability model. And anybody who's interested in, like, I could go on and on about like definitions for neurodiversity, but you guys could Google it. Anybody who's interested in kind of learning more about like the foundations of the movement, I highly recommend that you look into other diversity movements. Specifically, I find a lot of alignment with the deaf movement. And they're very particular about the words that are used to describe them as well. And there is a reason for that. And it is because of wanting to move away from the medical model when explaining certain aspects of autism.
So the ableist perspective, based on what you're saying, is really more looking rather than these as sort of evolutionary differences that naturally are going to merge, like typical variation that we would see across all species, and possibly even an advantageous adaptation. I know that I've heard in kind of some of the more parental communities that I've been involved with, some of them have referred to autistic individuals as the indigo children. They're like the next phase in evolution. Mm-hmm. And I'm not exactly sure what that's designed to mean. Maybe you can enlighten me on that. But
I think with that line of thinking, you just have to be careful that you're not leaving out an entire group of people who are highly impacted. The way that I look at autism is it isn't always a superpower, right? Like it can be, and it is for a lot of us. And even those of us who are super impacted might still have superpowers, right? And to me, it's more like you have an Apple computer and you have, Windows computer, and Windows computer is great and it runs efficiently and it's more commonly used than an Apple device. And most of the products and software that you can purchase readily and for less cost are going to be those programs that build right into it. But if you have an Apple computer, it's not necessarily that Microsoft Word isn't going to work in your Apple computer. It's that you have to have a completely different type of software because you have a different operating system.
In the computer language, we talk about a patch. And this was something when I was teaching vocational skills that I found to be really a sensitive issue for individuals. Well, I don't want to change who I am just to fit in a workplace. That's true, but even as a neurotypical individual, I do. Where is that line? When is it, we're teaching them to mask, or it's more of a conversion of the behavioral traits in order to have that compatibility? And when is it just training up skills?
I think when it comes to the masking conversation, it's important to know that one, autistic people do not have the same value systems often. I don't speak for every autistic person, but in general, we do not have the same value systems. And because we're not as open to the peer pressure and the social conditioning, it's often also that we don't see the value in the end goal of doing those things. And in other countries, lots of autistic individuals aren't really kind of in this clinical modality where like the end goal is to get them to be as independent as possible and get them to have a job if they can. And that's not necessarily in alignment with our community. But what I will say, I consider my ability to go into both environments a skill. And it's a skill that unfortunately was conditioned in me. And, you know, I see other autistic individuals just being able to live their best autistic life and not mask in situations where I'm masking actively. And I get a little jealous. I get a little jealous that they're able to do that, and be that free. But in the same token, I feel like, especially as a provider, that my skill set that I was able to acquire, which is quote unquote masking, for me to not at least allow people the access to knowing that those skills exist and giving them the option to learn those skills would be problematic, because I think I'm very privileged in several ways. That I was able to get a diagnosis as a female in the 80s is insane. That is a big privilege. There's a lot of women my age who've been struggling with, you know, their symptoms their whole lives, and they've been misdiagnosed.
But I think for you, when you're talking about this idea of your jealousy of somebody who's masking or not masking, I mean, to some extent, as I can only relate to my own experience, and obviously mine's very different as like a middle class white male with maybe too much education. But you know, when we take a perspective on this, I think about it all the time as like one of confidence. Like, I'm always jealous of people who are able to be their authentic self, regardless of the situation, not cater to those around them, not tiptoe, not worry about like walking on eggshells. And so when you talk about those values, I know as a clinician, this is something that I've always struggled with. It's like, oh, our goal is to focus on socially significant behaviors. Well, who's the arbiter of what is significant? And additionally, do those values match? And sometimes it's hard for individuals who are higher impacted or have lower vocabularies, even if they have, no impediments to their thought processes, to advocate for themselves along those lines. So when we put a goal like, oh, I want you to have friends, and the kid says, well, I don't care about having friends, should we just accept that?
Yes, 100% you should. And if your client has the ability to give input on the goals, if they are able to in some way impact the goals that are being targeted, that's a really beautiful thing. And they might tell you, I'm not interested in making friends, but then maybe you find out, you're observing a session that they are chatting with their friends on their Fortnite game and they're having difficulty with that communication. When you write your goals, they hear the goals from your perspective. So kind of like your job as an analyst is to help them understand the parts of their life that would benefit most from the goals and apply it specifically to that. So don't write a goal to make new friends, write a goal to be able to communicate more effectively with your gaming people. Or if you have a learner who really likes Starbucks and you're trying to increase social interaction, make it naturalistic to what they would already be doing in their schedule. Make it so that they, maybe they're just working on, ordering their own Starbucks, or that is a social interaction. And then it's paired with something that's already preferred. And if at that point, that exposes them to a social environment. And then if at that point they decide that that's reinforcing for them, if they come into contact with social reinforcement, cool, you can build on that. And if not, then that's not something that's important to them and it's not socially significant.
That kind of brings me to, there's a lot of things that I had about questions about politeness. Like, is politeness masking? Are manners and sort of social order, is that masking? Is that something that we need to, or is that sort of a mutually agreed upon form of communication that we should be teaching autistic individuals to engage in as well?
Most often with my adult clients, I'm actually working on the opposite of them being polite. I am working on them advocating for themselves. And it's because most of my adult clients currently, this hasn't always been the case, but right now, most of my adult clients have been in services since they were like 2. And so they have had a ton of old school compliance training, DTT, at the table, escape extinction, forced feeding programs, and they have trouble being rude when they should be rude. They have trouble understanding when a request that is made of them is inappropriate. They have trouble even when they're clearly in having some type of, internal private event that's causing them distress. They have difficulty expressing that, because throughout their service history, when they've expressed disinterest, or they've been non-compliant, or they've had emotional outbursts, it's been met with aversive procedures. So then they start to associate their own aversive feelings with all of these environmental situations like punishments and extinction procedures. And it is really difficult to undo that. Very difficult.
So just really briefly, I'd love to step back and ask you really quickly, like, how did you come to be in the field? Like, you're a BCBA. Did you receive services yourself?
I had services, not ABA services, but I definitely had quite a bit of attention on me and my brain as a child. In elementary school and in middle school and in high school was in both special education and general education. And in some instances, I was also briefly in gifted classes at the same time that I was in special education. And in middle school, there was an incident where it was a new school to me. I just moved to this town, and I was having a lot of social difficulties. I couldn't open my locker because of my motor skills. So I didn't really know what to do in the hallway. I didn't want people to know I couldn't open my locker. And I didn't really know where to stand in the hallways if I didn't have a locker, and I didn't know where to sit in the cafeteria. And the sounds and the smells and everything was just very overwhelming for me. And my special education teacher, who just had me for like one period a day, happened to find me in the bathroom, hiding and crying and eating my lunch on a toilet. And of course, she just, this beautiful, beautiful woman, scooped me up and was like, you know what? You've always been really helpful with the more severe kids when I have them. And I happen to have the most severe kids during your lunch period. Why don't we talk to your parents and see if we can get you to come volunteer in this classroom during your lunch period? And so that's what I started doing. And actually, that's the first time I ever knowingly came into contact with another autistic person.
Wow.
And he was nonverbal, and nobody could get any work done with him. And I was able to figure out that he really liked the color orange, and was able to motivate him using orange for everything. Like orange Tic Tacs, orange, stimuli, oranges, like everything. And I taught him to read and to talk, and it was just amazing for me. And then I was able to get a scholarship because I'm special needs, and because I wanted to go into working with my peers. I was able to get a scholarship called the Do It Scholarship, where I was able to kind of focus on special education and things like that in my earlier part of my education. And then somewhere along the line, I did a complete flip and decided I was really into Freud and psychoanalysis. I got really into that in my earlier part of my education, and was able to get my first job in ABA, and then immediately was like, okay, no. There's data, and same thing happened, just like the kid I had in my classroom. The same thing happened, my first ABA case. It was like a nonverbal person who was injuring themselves constantly. The girl had been removed from speech therapy. Caregivers were told because she was 8 and she wasn't even vocalizing, they were going to move on to something else. And within 6 months, I moved that VB map super far. She had 50 signs, 20 words. She stopped injuring herself. And I had all of the data to look at and to show. And it was beautiful. And I immediately switched my major from clinical psych to ABA. I really fell in love at that moment.
While conducting an observation, myself and a colleague were secretly following a client and their family in a store. The family was 100% in on it and wanted us to observe problem behaviors they were dealing with at a particular store. We would stay out of sight from the client but be close enough to observe and take notes when needed. We were coaching the parent over text message exchange in the store when a store employee kicked us out because they thought we were stalking the family. We didn't want to out our client/family, but the parent saw what was going on and explained to the staff member. I'm sure we seemed a bit creepy if they didn't know what was going on. Do you have a story you'd like to be featured on Tales from the Field? Please email us at bxperspectives@gmail.com.
Why are there so many superhero movies?
Yeah, why are there so many superhero movies was the question I believe that we were asking. And I was saying, I think one of the things that was very interesting about what Marvel attempted to do is they tried to integrate all of their marketing at once. They wanted every movie to be affiliated with all the other movies. And so they came up with the Marvel Universe. And it included everything from advertising, video games, augmented reality video games that were on your phone, 2D games that were on your phone, to virtual reality and 3D stuff, so that and I think it was all just a marketing strategy, and it just took off in ways that people did not imagine that it would.
I thought it was brilliant because you can enjoy a movie without seeing another movie, but it makes that one movie so much more enjoyable if you've seen all the other movies, right? So what is that called? Where your enjoyment here depends on your enjoyment here. Is there like a behavior analytic term for that?
Yeah, I mean, essentially what they're doing, like, one, that was true in the comic books. And so I think what they were trying to do is say, like, let's take comic book culture and manifest it across all platforms. But what they were doing is they were pairing what were seemingly independent or arbitrary stimuli together. And it had kind of an amplifying effect, a value altering effect, in the same way that you would talk about contriving establishing operations.
Yeah, I know
and that evocative
like,
stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I know for myself, I haven't really watched too many superhero movies in general, but just seeing the amount of movies is definitely interesting. But also something I'm noticing is that there's just such a diversity in the types of superheroes that I think is also helping too, as far as like getting more audience, I guess. Like even my niece is now interested. I don't even know what it's called, but there's a female superhero and she resonates with that. And now they've got more of an audience because now they've got her. So I do think that that's interesting too. It's the diversity.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Mallory, on the diversity thing, actually, because I remember they did add in, different types of like genders and, races involved, like that kind of like empowers people, certain groups, I guess you could say. And like, I don't know if you guys know, like they're even turning certain superheroes into someone else. Like, think Miss Marvel. I don't know if you guys know who that is. They first started off with someone who was Caucasian, and then now I guess they're transitioning it into someone in another culture. If you guys noticed that.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that there's. Oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
Well, I was just gonna say, kind of like with because I saw Endgame, and I don't know if you guys saw the TV shows that were after Endgame. Like you said, value altering effects, because I really enjoyed. Everyone hated this one, the one with the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. They said it was terrible, but I liked it.
I enjoyed it.
Huh? Did you like that one?
I enjoyed it, yeah.
Right, I thought it was good. But now spoiler alert for anyone who didn't see it, hopefully you did, the new Captain America, he gave a shield away to Falcon, right? Is that what happened?
Yeah, I believe so.
If I didn't see Endgame and I didn't see Captain America, maybe the TV show would not have been so enjoyable to me, right? So they're really banking on that value altering effect to sell these things. And really, maybe you feel like going back to now watch, because there's one scene that if you don't see it, you don't get Black Panther, the assassination scene, which I never saw. So I knew the father was assassinated, but I'm like, I'm not going to watch 20 movies just to enjoy one scene, you know? But my cousin did.
Yeah, and I think something that they're also doing that is really smart in terms of these pairings, and this is where the writing, and this is something you're seeing across a lot of, in particular, like the Apple Plus themed shows that they're doing, which is let's take socially relevant topics and infuse them into some of these superhero things. Like what was so great about the Captain America spinoff was that when they tried to replace Captain America, he was a bad guy. And it turns out that the original Captain America replacement was Black. And they didn't feel like America was ready for that. And so this is like the passing of the torch. And it was very much like a racially infused thing. Like who would have known that Black Panther would be one of the highest grossing films in the history of the Marvel Universe with almost an entirely Black cast? And you would have thought like, oh, this is going to be the one that would not do quite as well on the international stage, and it was totally the reverse. I think a lot of that had to do with the quality of the film, and the writing and acting was just better than other Marvel movies. And it just so happened that when you put, Chadwick Boseman in there, he is magnetic and amazing. But yeah, I think that they're doing a lot of really interesting pairings, and they're trying to constantly capture the zeitgeist. And one of the things that is also cool about the universe is that it's really flexible. Like what you brought up, NJ, now all of a sudden they can appeal to younger audiences with Ms. Marvel, and like whatever the ultraviolet one is about the luchadores. And then it's sort of like Marvel can exist in every context, in every culture. It can be culturally relevant. And then there can be all these crossovers. Like I have no doubt that these kids shows are going to show up in the real Marvel universe in the same way that Spider-Man did. I was supposed to be like the kid comic superhero, and then they also all kind of, I think part of the thing that is very relatable is that a lot of these people come in with an anti-hero. Oh, these are normal kids. Like Spider-Man was some normal kid who got bit by a spider, and now all of a sudden he has superpowers, and he like has to grow up in the Marvel universe. And what was so great about Endgame is like, that scene with him and Iron Man is like, the real underlying thing of why he wants to be a Marvel hero is because he wants a family again. He's looking for a dad, and Iron Man is like, I'm not your dad, but I love you, kid. And then they, disappear in the universe or whatever. But I think what's cool about it is that there's a lot of programming that's going on, and I would want to know where they're getting all of this data. I mean, what's cool, not cool necessarily, about Netflix or Amazon tracking us, or Hulu for that matter, is that they are collecting all of that data, and so they know exactly what kind of movies you're going to like. Like I can't remember the last time Netflix said that it had a 98% or higher, likability rating, and I did not like that movie. Like I was like, it may not be my cup of tea necessarily, but I definitely enjoyed it. So I think there's a lot of user data interface stuff, and so this is where the information that they're taking from us is all really helpful. But I think a lot of it's just respondent conditioning.